As some of you are aware, you know that I had a wonderful opportunity this last week to spend some time with a bishop from New Hampshire. His name is the Right Reverend Eugene Robinson. He kept inviting us simply to call him Gene. But this bishop from New Hampshire, who has lived a witness of both a vibrant faith as well as risk-taking, of stepping out and proclaiming a new word to the church and to the world. And as we reflected on the Easter text, he invited us to think about this community that had gathered around Jesus. He invited us to think of the text that we had last week, as well as the text that we continue to receive through this Easter season. You see, last week we had those texts of the disciples locked in their room for fear of the Jews, we are told, or for fear of the Jewish authorities. He invited us to rethink that. You see, he said the gospel writer probably got it wrong. That the disciples weren't really so scared of the Jews or the Jewish authorities. He thinks they were pretty scared of Jesus actually showing up. You see, here are the people who have abandoned him as he was led to trial, who have fallen away at the foot of the cross, who have struggled with what this means to follow a Jesus who was placed in the ground. And what happens if these women are right? What happens if Jesus isn't locked, safe and sound in a tomb? Then that means they're in trouble. Maybe not that Jesus is going to get mad. He knew that things were going to get rough, and he told them that they would abandon and fall away. But if he doesn't stay locked in a tomb, then that means their lives can't simply go back to being the way that they were. That they are going to be met again and changed or transformed by this risen and living Christ. It's a scary notion. And so we lock ourselves in our own little rooms, comfortable, perhaps with those that we really like or have gotten to know over the years. We lock ourselves in for a sense of safety, protection, perhaps just feeling that we're okay. But it's there that Jesus continues to come and rattle and shake and stir and prod and to say, guess what? This tomb that you thought had the last word, not so much. This cross that the empire has meant to silence the people, not going to happen. Instead, there is going to be a transformation, and guess what? You are part of that story. Now, Bishop Robinson also pointed out that as people encountered this story and this living Christ, that they were indeed changed. As far as we can tell, these women and men who maybe hoped to simply go back to their fishing nets, or back to their kitchen and cleaning, or back to their tax collecting or healing in a neat little home office. It didn't happen. They didn't end up being couch potatoes, watching the plays of their days or simply laying back. In a sense, they were called into a new way of being. Most of them were big risk takers, to the point that the empire and the ways of this world couldn't understand them or tolerate them. They were willing to push boundaries and to stand out on the edge. And Jesus continues to show up. saying to us, as Jesus said to them, first stop, peace be with you. As you come into these spaces, whether in a locked room or on a seashore after fishing all night, that Jesus comes among, sits, tells stories in community, invites us to hear again what it means to encounter God's transformative love, what it means to hear a vision of peace, what it means for us to know that we are beloved children of God, and engage in sending us out into the world with a mission, a true mission of reconciliation. Now we lodge that in this language of repentance and forgiveness, of turning around and hearing a word of hope for us. Sometimes I think repentance and forgiveness sounds so heavy, drudgery. But what happens when we envision it as a reconciliation of bringing who we are into an experience with the other, the holy, our neighbor, the stranger down the street, the earth upon which we walk and whose air we breathe? What happens when we are encountered and brought into reconciliation that we might live in a bold and incredible new way? And that we're not comfortable sitting in our TV room, our bedroom, and simply flipping on the channels and scrolling through the endless one after another TV channels, or turning on the radio and letting our minds go numb, or simply playing on our computers Scrabble and Solitaire for want of nothing better to do. But rather that we are called and lifted into a new way of being witnesses to reconciliation, of being witnesses of new life entering in here and now. That becomes a little more challenging. But I think it's much more rewarding. As I sat this week with a group of 75 people, about 2/3 who are seminarians or gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, rostered leaders, pastor, deacon, associates in ministry, what became clear is that each one of them, each one of us had taken a risk, working to integrate spirituality and sexuality, working to bring together the various pieces of who we were and to speak a word of hope in the church, in the world. And then the question lingered, what happens now? The ELCA changed its policy. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada has changed its policy. It's easy to think, our work's done. Let's go home, watch a little TV, hang out with friends. But as we dug deeper into this story, we realize that it's that component that continues to challenge us forward. That simply the change in policy, just like the change 2,000 years ago of going up against the empire, going up against those in authority who would continue to weigh people down, that that's not the last word. That the last word is that we are called again and again to live into new ways of being and not leave others behind.